How you doing, Dr. Mullins? Kanoa, this is Dr. Ryan Mullins. You know anything about this?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Let's do a quick for those who don't know Dr. Mullins, so I'm just going to read from a script here. Dr. Mullins is a philosopher of religion, theologian whose work focuses on the nature of God, divine attribute, and contemporary analytic theology. He's especially known for his rigorous engagement with classical theism, divine simplicity, and models of divine omniscience and freedom. Through both academic publications and public dialogue, Dr. Mullins has contributed significantly to ongoing debates at the intersection of philosophy, metaphysics, and Christian theology. We're glad to have him here with us to discuss the issues in which we need clarification on. How did you like that AI-generated introduction?
It's close enough, yeah.
I thought it was really well worded.
It was well worded. There was one time, this was a couple years ago, somebody tried to use an AI-generated one. It was so wildly off base, and it had then the guy listed a bunch of books that I had not written. I mean, I've written a fair number of books, but like I had not written any of these. And I mentioned it to the guy, and it was a car crash of an interview, and we just ended up he never aired it. He never released the video, which is for the best. It was bad.
Dr. Ryan Mullins, author of The Catcher of the Rye. Wait, what? Have with us today, also a co-author of To Kill a Mockingbird. So hey, Dr. Mullins, I'm Constantine Chronicles. We operate in the cesspool of TikTok, in which your counterpart, Dr. Tuggy, said he likened to Tatooine. It's the debate space for all things horrible.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's accurate.
We typically don't get to deal with someone at your conversation, so you'll forgive us if we're very unrefined. Kanoa here operates specifically in political arenas regarding abortion laws, as he is a proponent for the abolitionist movement.
I just make the government upset.
Right. Yeah, sure thing. So, Dr. Mullins, we want to ask you a few questions regarding some of your works, and we want to thank you for being here today. Yeah. So, off the cuff, Dr. Mullins, what is your view of Scripture? How high of a regard do you hold the narrative of the Bible itself?
So my approach to when I'm doing Christian theology is that this is supposed to be like the ultimate authority for how we theorize about God and ultimate reality. It's got to be the starting point, and it's also has to be the corrective for some of our speculation. Because I can speculate all day long on lots of things, but if I am not grounded in the biblical story, then I'm just doing something else. I'm not really doing Christian theology anymore. So I take it in a very high regard. I don't know what labels to attach to it, but yeah, I think it's got to have a very fundamental role in our theology.
Yeah. Okay, so would you say that everything that you've predicated your thesis on have come from Scripture? So, and do your positions, because let's be honest, your positions are controversial, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And so, are they controversial because they counteract what Thomas Aquinas said, or are they controversial because they counteract what the Bible says?
It's controversial because it counteracts what Aquinas says, and we are living in sort of the end of a golden era of Thomism that's been going on for a little over 100 years now. So that's why it's controversial. Was there's this rising tide of Thomism that's been taking place in the 20th century, and then that started to leak into the Protestant world, and we see a lot of that kind of creeping into the Protestant world in the 21st century. And that happened to be right when I was finishing my PhD, thinking I'm saying things that are not that controversial in the Protestant world, and then all of a sudden turns out they are wildly controversial, even though they weren't like 20 years ago. So I'm saying things that like Baptists would have thought were like just painfully boring and true throughout most of the 20th century. But now everyone's just like, what heresy is this? And I'm like, all right, okay, cool. This is the way fashion trends work in intellectual history.
Yeah. If you, has anyone gone so far as to call you a heretic?
Oh gosh, yeah. I've had people tell me I should lose my job, my ordination should be revoked, burning in hell, like all this kind of stuff. I remember one time I was at a conference.
Yeah.
I won't name the person, but he was writing a really interesting dissertation on Christology, and I was just like, oh, how are you dealing with this objection? What about this objection? Just asking him about his own PhD topic, and at some point he looks at me and goes, "Are you even Christian?" I was just like, "Whew, all right." And I gave him a look like, "Is this what you want to do?" And he said, "I mean, what kind of Christian brother are you?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll answer that question."
Yeah. Yeah. And so, getting into the meat of this, the question that I have is, your position is that God is temporal. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if I were to say if God is temporal, what automatically it entails from that, or perhaps I'm wrong, is that his necessity require time itself to be necessary. And if that's the case, how does that avoid collapsing into some sort of modal pantheism?
Mm-hmm. So here's something to preface the entire conversation. When we are talking about time, people's intuitions are absolutely terrible. We have been corrupted by people have been corrupted by a lot of sci-fi, which is fun, but like it means your minds are just kind of mush when it comes to this topic. So when we define some terms, like things kind of become a bit more clear. But yeah, there's a lot of objections that come up, and I'm often sitting there going, how did we get to like this? I don't understand what we got here. So this question would be an example of this, of like, I don't know how we're getting to like pantheism. I could try to guess, and I could add some steps in there, and so maybe that would be useful. So a lot of times people think that if you say God is temporal, then you're somehow identifying God with a created order in some kind of way.
Cooperator.
Yeah, and you're like, how exactly to get there? I don't know. There's a lot of ways you could get there, but that's, I think, kind of the intuition. If you identify God as temporal, then you're somehow connecting to the created order. Well, what are some people that have done that? Well, pantheists, they did that, and we don't like them. We know they're bad. So, like this is the way we reason in theology. It's like going back to like the patristic era, where like the early church fathers would be like, well, you learned all your ideas from the devil, and we know the devil's bad, so clearly your ideas are bad. And you're like, okay, so therefore I win. I think that's kind of the idea here. Yeah. Here's where I think some of the intuition goes right, though, where it goes correctly. If you think that God is temporal, then that does seem to entail that time is necessary. Why? Well, things that are eternal often are also necessary. Things that are necessary, they have to be eternal, because necessarily existent things have to exist. And eternal things, well, they exist without beginning, without end. So if they necessarily exist, then they're eternal. If you think God's like temporal, well, God necessarily exists. Well, does that mean that time necessarily exists and that time's eternal? Yeah, maybe. There's some ways you could try to make those things come apart, but that's the intuition there. And there are a lot of people in the past and today who think that, yeah, if God's temporal, he's necessarily temporal, and does that mean time necessarily exists? Does anything else necessarily exist? I don't know. We can debate that, but I just got your time.
I would say that there could be, me personally, I would be if invoking or broaching upon Christian idealism as composed by Jonathan Edwards. I would take everything to be within the mind of God. And I don't even say time has an ontology. People talk to me about matter, and I'm like, what's that? I become like, get amnesia all of a sudden. I would take everything to be in the mind of God, and there could be no other way. So I'll just walk around with a backpack that says modal collapse all day and be fine with it. And people would kind of freak out. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'm like, hold on, don't quote any Jonathan Edwards if you don't like, or if you want to be Calvinist, don't quote Jonathan Edwards again if you hate my ideas.
Right.
Like, take the church covenant off the wall.
Yeah.
I get it. There's a lot of unnecessary baggage that comes along with the belief system. But what's really required here is if it's predicated on scripture, the reconciliation of the omniscient attributes, which are outlined in the Old Covenant as well as the New. Have you found anyone to position something alternative to what you believe and say, look, this isn't biblical, Dr. Mullins? I come across that with idealism all the time, yet I've never seen a source of scripture to negate otherwise.
Yeah. So here's how you try to argue that divine temporality is against scripture. So first step is you ignore the fact that all of the biblical terms for eternity are temporal terms. So you ignore that. Second, you ignore the fact that, which I don't, like, this sounds like I'm poisoning the well, but this I'm describing very accurately.
Get out of here.
Yeah, because like Francis Turretin, there's a long history of this. So there's, like, going back to at least to Augustine, there's this question of why are all the biblical terms for eternity temporal terms? Like, that's just a question that's been asked throughout history. And typically the answer is like, well, we know from philosophy that like this just can't be right. And so it really is just we ignore this fact about reality, about what's going on in the Bible. The second thing we ignore in the Bible is every single instance where God is described as undergoing succession, as doing one thing and then another. We ignore all of that. Instead, what we do is we look at a couple different passages where it says God does not change. And we ignore the context, and we ignore that all of those passages say God does not change in a very super specific way. We ignore all of that.
Anthropomorphized.
Yeah. And so then when you say it's all anthropomorphic. So what you have to do is you have to explain away basically everything in the biblical text in order to go, but at least that one phrase is there, doesn't change. And you're like, cool. Which, look, there's always going to be an element of anthropomorphizing going on in scripture, and we do it in our theology. We have to make good judgments about it. So that big idea of like, yeah, there's some stuff in scripture that's anthropomorphic, that's fine, but like the scale here is pretty remarkable, where it's like, what's left over that's literally true about God? And you're like, well, let's rip out almost everything in here. And there are 3 clauses, not even full sentences, 3 clauses contained in sentences where it says God does not change. That's the real story of God. And you're like, okay, so like this entire book, I can only boil down to just 3. Okay. That's a thing you could do. It's a move you can make.
Yeah, you could make that move. In fact, we deal with it all the time in the leisurely land of class called TikTok. Where a verse can be extrapolated and then an entire theology be built on it as if it was the Church of Christ. Now, what I'd like to ask you as far as harmony is concerned is, would you hold that time has an ontology or certain property sets and how they coincide or are co-equal to, and how is God supposed to operate within linear time and still not be holden or restrained to it, in conjunction with what Isaiah says as he was presenting a God that is omniscient and that he knows the words you speak before it leaves the mouth, right? And again, that may be verse isolation to sort of use an anthropomorphized or descriptive narrative in order to prescribe a specific idea of what God is trying to say. But you would just say that's not holding against your idea when I take everything into linear contextual fluidity. Would that be the case?
Yeah. So I think linear. I actually in my book, The Divine Time Maker, I say, like, you can talk about time as a line in some kind of meaningful sense, but I caution against it, because these are using spatial metaphors to talk about time. And a lot of confusion enters into the conversation when we are confusing space and time. So does time have a direction? And a lot of people go, yeah. And some people are like, well, could it go the other way? And I'm like,
from A to B.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, what would it mean for time to go backwards? So that makes no sense. And I think a lot of it's because people are using spatial metaphors. So talking in a linear term, all you're really saying is one event happens and then another happens and then another and then another. That's it. And that's just how causation works. So if God's all alone prior to creation, not doing anything, and then God creates a universe, and then God comes to exist with the universe. And then he's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And then he looks at Abraham, and he's like, hey, let's go do some stuff over here. And then this is just the way, like, causation works. It's just a lot of and thens. So that's linear in a sense. I know what you mean when you say it's linear, but but sometimes we can get confused.
Linear and narrative.
Correct. Yes. And I think that's just the way causation and time just has to work. I think these are fundamental features of it. So if God has power and God has free will, and God wants to exercise his power, that's just the consequence. Is he's not doing something, then the logical consequence is, I want to do something. Well, now I'm doing it. And now, and now, and now, and then, and then. So there's no, like, there wouldn't be confines. Like, it wouldn't be constraining God. It's just like, that's just how things work.
And I don't mean to hog the floor. I'm sure Kanoa has questions, but one thing before I turn it over to him, how we're handling the decree and sovereignty is something that me and Kanoa deal with all the time. Is just dirty Calvinist. They just come after us. Listen, Dr. Mullins, they just come after us.
Oh, I know.
You know what I mean? But look, we're just coming after us. Like, but hold on, we're saying that this could be no other way. But I'm still saying that you're morally culpable. How are you handling sovereignty and what you would parse out to be some sort of will of man and not bondage to it?
Yeah. So I wrote this paper. This would be, I think it's in 2015 when it finally gets published. It's called "Is God the prisoner of?" Oh wait, sorry. Doing hard time. Is God the prisoner of the oldest dimension? And so there's this objection of like, if God is temporal, then he's not sovereign. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's look at that. And then I started going through all these different books on sovereignty, trying to go, tell me what sovereignty is. Because if that's the problem, well, I need to get a good definition of sovereignty. And then I can go, is God sovereign or not? And what I noticed is, no one would tell me what it is. And that was super annoying. And I even read a book called 6 Views on Sovereignty. And the people were like, no one defined it. What sovereignty means is my view of God, my view of predestination, my view of, and so of course, if you disagree with my view, that's just what sovereignty is. So then of course you're diminishing God's sovereignty. So I had to come up with a definition of sovereignty loosely inspired by B.B. Warfield. So loosely inspired by some Calvinists. So here's the idea. There's certain conditions that need to be in place in order to be sovereign. One of those is you got to have all the power. So you're omnipotent. And you got to have free will and reason, because you perform free actions on the basis of a good reason. That's what it means to have free will. So basically you're building in a lot of the ingredients of like God's essential attributes. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's perfectly rational. He's got free will. Now, the next step is God is sovereign if and only if he is able to successfully complete whatever his goals are. So he sets a goal, he decrees that's the goal I want, and then he's able to bring it about. That's it. And so you're successful. You're sovereign if you're able to do that. Because sovereignty it's a relational term. You're sovereign over something. You're sovereign over the completion of this goal that you have. And if God's goal is, I want to create a universe, enter into friendship with some humans, maybe become incarnate, that'd be pretty cool. Like a bunch of different stuff that you see in scripture. Well, then you're like, okay, so God's got a goal that he's set for himself. And he's got a thing now that he's ruling over. So he's sovereign over something. And he's sovereign over bringing everything to the completion of that goal. So it's a success term in one sense. All that's very, very temporal. God's not doing anything. Then he's like, yep, I want to do this for this goal. Now I'm doing it. There we go. I'm predestining. This is what I want to happen. Now I'm making it happen. It's pretty straightforward.
Right. The chat over. We're good. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to go away from everything that you're talking about, but I had more questions on because it's on my Christmas list to get your book on time and stuff like that. And then from what people are saying, it's a pretty thick book to go through, and to get on there. So I don't. So forgive me if I'm taking away from what you guys are saying on there. But the question that I have for you is, what made you kind of like think about, think about time, and then I'm going to write this really thick book on it. Like
Yeah.
like were you late for something and somebody said, hey, you don't know do you know what time is? And then you were like, you know what, do I? And then, caused you to
Right.
think.
Yeah. So let me say something before I answer that question. So the recent books here, from Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, I wrote it while I was a research fellow at the University of Helsinki. And the Collegium for Advanced Studies has an obligation to the Finnish taxpayers to make a lot of the research publicly available that's been funded by it. So they just paid the open access fees for the Divine Time Maker book, which means you can download it for free from the publisher's website, because the University of Helsinki paid all those fees. So you can get it for free now. It's not as cool as having,
I was gonna say it won't look as cool on the show.
No. And it's a sizable book. Like I've got, it's back there. It's like, it's thick, but but at least now if people who they want it, they don't want to pay $150 to try to get it because that's ridiculous. You can get it you can download it for free, and it's all legal. You don't have to go to those dark Russian websites to do that. So that's cool. Now, origin story. So high school, I went to this private Christian school in Indianapolis, Indiana, and in English class we had to read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, like one year. And Lewis has this chapter on, I think it's on like prayer, but it's where he gets into his own like bizarre theory on God and time. And I don't know if I read the chapter for class. I probably didn't, but I read it later because the teacher that day, she was getting really annoyed that no one was just kind of interacting with the book because they probably didn't read it because we're like 16 years old. And she got really mad. She just shouted. She's like, well, C.S. Lewis is saying God's outside of time. If that's not blowing your mind, then you're not really thinking about it. And
she said that.
She said that. She just yelled it at us. She was very charismatic person. And I remember just kind of really being taken aback by that and going, that is pretty mind blowing. Like that is crazy.
It's the beginning of a villain origin story here.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I got really obsessed with this. And so when I started university, I bought 3 books when I started at university. I got first it was Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, and then William Lane Craig had just published his book Time and Eternity, which is supposed to be his popular level book on the topic. I didn't know who the guy was at the time. And then shortly after that, I bought St. Augustine's Confessions because he was quoted in both of those books. And so I just got obsessed from the topic, from there on.
How old?
So this would be like freshman in university. So I'm like 19.
Yeah, I was definitely going through St. Augustine's Confessions in the 9th grade, bro.
Right. Yeah. You're 19. You're like, should I go to this party with all these girls? I got to finish reading this chapter from Augustine. Like, come on, and Augustine's like, grant me chastity, but not yet. And I'm like, I understand. I get it.
Yeah. So listen, one of my favorite quotes from you. I want to talk about God, and I want to say the less silly things when I talk about it. Right? I've heard you mention that before.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to silly things, like as an idealist, I say a lot of silly things to people. But what a question I would have from you from my position, from my perspective, would still ask the question in the temporal state. Does if the necessity entails time itself, would you agree with the statement that it wouldn't necessarily be a divine idea, but it would have some sort of ontology, some sort of substance, some sort of property which exists outside of the mind?
It depends. So I affirm what's called an absolute theory of time. And so time is supposed to be this all-pervasive natured entity that makes change possible. It's the source of moments. I'll tell you what a moment is in a second. I'll tell you it in a moment. And it's the thing that unifies a series of moments. See, there we go. That was good. And then so time is this all-pervasive thing that's a natured entity. It makes change possible. It's the source of moments, and it's the thing that unifies a series of moments into some sort of coherent, or what we call like a timeline. So all the and then stuff we talked about earlier. So a moment is just the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. So if God pressed pause on the universe,
Really?
it's it. Yeah. So if God pressed pause on the universe, well, there'd be a way things are. And if you press play, well, they could be otherwise at the next moment. And so that's the view. That's what the absolutist typically says. From there, there's a bunch of debates about, is time this substance that exists independent of God? Is it a substance that God created? Or is it part of the divine nature itself? So there were a lot of different people throughout history who said time is an essential mode or an essential attribute of God. So it's not something that God created, because it's just an essential attribute of God. It's like, did God create his power? No, you'd have to have power to create your power, you know? Let's say the same thing about eternity or omniscience or love or whatever other attribute you want to predicate of God. Time is supposed to be in that same category. So this is Isaac Newton, Samuel Clarke, Henry Moore. These are people in the Western tradition, at least, who would affirm this kind of view.
Is it absolutely identical to God in how he treats time? Is
some people
an attribute
say that.
of God?
Yeah, so some people do. So there's this guy named Nicole Orsamy, who's from the 1400s, I think, or maybe 1300s. He gets asked by the French king, can you please make this translation of Aristotle's book? And he's like, yeah, if you let me write a commentary. And the king's like, I don't care about your idea, just fine, whatever, just translate it into French. And so he does. And when he's writing his own commentaries, he's arguing against Aristotle left and right. And he says, yeah, eternity, that could properly be called time itself. Space, that could properly be called God's immensity or his omnipresence. So these are definitely, you could say, they're attributes of God. But Nicole Orsamy also affirms divine timelessness. And so he says, it sounds kind of weird, though, to say that time is an attribute of God when God's timeless. I don't know. Anyway, next topic. And he just kind of moves on.
Yeah. Just hand waved?
Yeah, just kind of like, he's like, yeah, it's weird, but next question. Demons, do they have spatial location? Yeah, here you go. And he just kind of goes like, he's just kind of doing this kind of stuff. And you're like, okay, I want to go back to that, but tell me now about the demons. That was kind of cool. So you kind of just roll with it, that he's not fully answered the issue. Whereas when you get to the scientific revolution, you've got a lot of people going, God's not timeless. That's the unintelligible notions of the scholastics. Let's get back to like the biblical view, which is that God is the one who was, is, and is to come. So a temporal God. And a lot of these people thought time was an attribute. So like when you're referring to God with his attributes, but his attributes are not identical to each other, and they're not identical to God, because what does that even mean? Was kind of the attitude.
So in your view, they've become composite, or?
No. So I don't think properties are parts. I think when we're talking about parts, we have to talk about substantial things, things that could come apart. God's essential attributes are not things that could come apart from God, so I don't think they count as parts. So you can have complexity without composition. You can have some kind of diversity without composition. Think of like, if you affirm, if you really affirm idealism, what kind of, I don't know what kind of idealism you affirm, if we're all just ideas in the mind of God, or if the only thing that exists are minds and ideas.
No, I would say that everything that we interact with is just an instantiation of a particular in which we can perceive. So as Jonathan Edwards quotes, to being is to be perceived. So what I interact with in a physical modality is just the particular of a grandiose universal, which takes part in the mind of God. And so as I'm interacting with something, that means it is simply revealed to me in time by the Spirit. So everything is a notion of God's mind and his direct idea. They call me a heretic sometimes too.
Well, yeah, that's fine, because Edwards was all the Calvinists like Edwards to a point, and then when it gets too idealistically, they're like, can we just go back to the Calvinism stuff? Like, that was cool.
Yeah, they're like, what about the demons?
So, right, can we go on to the demons? How many demons can be located right here?
Yeah.
No, well, when you're talking about in time, though, would that even, because I'm trying to because time being an attribute of God, which I presented that to somebody because when I heard about your position, that's why I was very interested to hear from you. And sorry, I'm not asking questions. I'm more like, I just want to sit here and take notes.
Yeah.
But when I presented that to some people, I mean, they kind of flipped out on me too and stuff, and they immediately jumped to like, Genesis 1:1. You probably heard this all the time. They're like, in the beginning.
Yeah.
They're like, there's time.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How does that relate to me though? Right.
But, right. Well,
is that the beginning to the perceiver? How am I
that's what I'm like.
Of time? That means nothing to me.
Well, right, and that's what I was going to ask though. Is when you hear stuff, and you probably heard all of it, obviously, is that to me that doesn't sound like it really does anything, because in the beginning God was there.
He's already there,
right?
Yeah, that's the thing. And then when you look at Psalm 90, it's like before the mountains were brought forth and before God created the heavens and the earth, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And you're like, in those terms, everlasting to everlasting, olam, it just means a really long time. So from a really long time to a really long time, all before the universe came to be, there's God. Yeah. And the entire idea of predestination that you see in Ephesians 1 and so on, like predestination means before God creates the universe. What is God doing? He's plotting to take over the world. That's what he's doing. He's coming up with a plan. So like, it's all. Yeah,
I'm a post millennialist. That sounds great.
Yeah. So this is how I see it.
The way you cash these things out, Dr. Mullins, is beyond.
Yeah. My little book about a big God, that's the way I describe predestination at the beginning of, and talking about time at in the beginning of the book is like, all right, let's look at Ephesians. What do we have here? We've got God plotting to take over the world. It's not the same as like Augustine's question, where it's like, what was God doing before he created the universe? Oh, he's creating hell for people who ask those kind of questions. And I'm like, that's funny, because Augustine does admit it's a joke. He's like, I'm not going to say that joke. I wouldn't say that joke. I just said the joke, though. Notice that? I'm not going to go that low. Here's my real answer. That's what Augustine does, which I think is hilarious. Whereas I go, that is funny, but here's what I see. I like what the Apostle Paul says. God's plotting to take over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I'm gonna steal that and use that now for my post-millennial slogan.
Yeah, that's ours now.
All right. So all right.
So what happened?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So it was to come back to
go ahead. You're good.
Because you were asking about Genesis. Yeah. So you see in the beginning, but you're like, the beginning of what? Because God's already there. And so a lot of people, they assume that Genesis 1:1 is teaching that time is a created thing. And so the question to ask at this point is to go, well, then why do we keep seeing all these verses that talk about God existing before the universe? Because before is a temporal term. And so that implies there was time before the beginning of the universe. And there's a lot of biblical passages to look at this. And then you can also bring in the pre-existence of Christ. And, there's a lot of stuff you bring up. And so you can call into question going, does the Bible actually teach that time began or that time is created? Because the earliest time mentioned in Scripture is the reality prior to creation. And if people go, well, it's not a temporal prior. And I'm like, so what is it? And they're like, well, it's a pre-temporal prior. And I'm like, before temporal prior? That's okay.
Roasted.
Yeah. And so I've got a couple papers and some places where I do this, where I'm like, I look at a bunch of these examples and I'm like, so it's a before the before, and it's a pre-pre, it's a prior. Thank you for illuminating this. Thank you so much. And then you got to just move on. Yeah. So that's the idea, is to just start going, let's look at all these different passages, see how they come together. Do they clash with some of our intuitions? Kind of do the whole theology thing.
From a practical perspective, I like to illustrate this in sort of like some sort of dream state. And when I propose, what the necessity of a mind, or in the mind of, just to answer your question earlier, I have no control over night and day in dreams, nor can I calculate that anything is wrong with a week going by. While I can still see the desk as a particular and interact with it and conclude that it's a substance, and have no problem questioning its substantive properties. And inside of that space, a week can go by, a day can go by, night can turn to day, and I have no question of it within the space of this realm. So when people talk about time to me at a preliminary level from a finite perspective, I don't even know if they know what they mean, because because they don't mean that all the time. Because if they slip into another level of consciousness, which I would still argue that comes from the mind of God, instantiated by the Spirit itself, that it is still a perception of time, and which is inscribed by God and His grand idea. I don't know how have you ever wrestled with this?
A bit, yeah, because here's one of the problems when we're doing philosophy of time. So I already talked about how we've got to like confront all these spatial metaphors that we use. Another issue that we confront is we often confuse the calendar or the clock with time itself. And so a lot of people, when they're asking questions, they're asking questions about clocks or calendars, which are fine. Those are fine questions to ask. But
a metric.
Yeah, exactly. Hardly anybody wants to do the work that I'm doing, which is like, no, but what exactly is time, and what are these really, really fundamental questions? Because the really, really fundamental questions are the ones that are kind of boring, or most people don't even know how to come at it. So there's questions about like, well, I'm perceiving the desk. I don't have any control over the calendar. Yeah, it's true, and that's fine. But what's the thing that's explaining all of that? And that's what I want to say. Time is the thing that's explaining all of this. It's explaining these moments. Why are these moments here? Why are these moments happening in the order that they're happening? Time is the thing that's supposed to explain all of that. And so if you think that time is an essential attribute of God, then you're saying, well, God's the thing that explains all of this. So there's another question too, I guess, related to this, which is people, when they're doing philosophy of time, because they don't like to answer that question, what is time? They usually want to avoid that question. They often start talking about features of a timeline itself instead of time itself.
Accidental properties.
Correct. Yeah. So the metric system, like not the metric in terms of like, like what like the people in Europe are using, because we're in America, so we're going to use the imperial system, not that. Like the actual like.
And that's why we fought the war.
Exactly. You get it.
We wanted to be away from the metric of time and have quarter pounders.
Exactly. A quarter pounder, not this like
whatever a royale with cheese is. We don't do that here.
No, we have real freedom.
It's a hard-fought privilege, sir. Thank you.
Exactly. So a lot of questions about time are usually questions about like a timeline, like features of like clocks and metrics. How do we come up with a good coordinate system? Questions about before and after and when things happened. And those are all good questions, but they are questions about features of a timeline. Time, on my view, is the thing that explains the timeline. And so sometimes these things get confused. They get people confuse them when they're trying to ask questions, because it's really hard to think consistently about this stuff.
Yeah, it's a quick day of school. If I just go ahead, no, I'm an idiot.
No, you're good. But like some of the and that's why I was really confused with how much people push back. Like even when I said, yeah, I don't know, I hold to the view, but I thought it was interesting when I heard it, and just by explaining it, and people freak out of it. But I was like, but it seems like, at least to me, it makes a lot of sense to say that that time is an attribute of God, and that didn't like and that's why I'm a little bit like, why is there so much pushback on there? And I think you kind of brought it up at the beginning that we've been we've been conditioned in this one way of thinking on that. But just like what you said, when you're talking about this stuff and really like trying to get into it and explain it, a lot of people don't really, and that's what I kind of experienced when I started asking people, well, how do you view this? What is it then? And how does saying that right, and how does saying that time is an attribute of God, how does that really affect anything? And maybe that's like what it like from just hearing it, I don't see how it changed. Like I feel like Constantine with his idealism, he can hold to that same thing just as somebody who, so it feels like all the beliefs can hold to it. So why the
why all the anger?
Well, right, but maybe
relationally or identically.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of like, okay, maybe you can tell me, like, is there certain views that cannot that it's not compatible with that, why people freak out over it? Or
well, so part of what
this is where he gets into a simplicity model,
right? So you could do that, but like part of what I'm up to in my book From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker is I start with this question of, okay, In the End of the Timeless God, I argued that God cannot be timeless. Well, now what? Like, so God's temporal. Okay, what does that mean? And then what are your options when you're trying to develop your systematic theology? Because a lot of discussions have been so shallow that people think they force you to go one way or the other. And what I do is I point out, it really depends on the rest of your theological system. Like, here's some of the implications of this, but you have a lot of options, and here's how you develop your options. So I argue it's consistent with just bare temporality. You could say time is created. You don't have to say it's an attribute of God, but that's one option. You could say God creates time, and then he becomes temporal when he creates time. Like, that's a view you could affirm. You could say God is necessarily temporal, and time's an attribute of God. That's another view you could affirm. When it comes to creation, you could affirm that the universe has always existed, or maybe a multiverse has always existed, or maybe the universe began to exist. You've got options. You could also say Calvinism is true. No Molinism. No open theism. No, like, you've got a lot of options. And then what you think about the timeline. Do all moments on the timeline equally exist? Oh, you could do that. And I've got a whole bunch of, like, drawing out the implications for that. Only the present moment? I think that's the right way to go, but people disagree. Here are the implications of that. And then here's all these other crazy views on time. Let's look at those. What about hyper time? What is that? So it just goes nuts. But I'm like, here's the theological implications of this, because I wanted people to understand that when you commit yourself to divine temporality, here is all you are saying. It's so minimal. It seems so trivial. You're just saying God does one thing and then another. That's it. And that doesn't sound that controversial. People still lose their minds over it, but just like, God does one thing and then another. He created it, and then he's like, yeah, next day I'll create something else. Next day and then God said it was good. And so all you're doing is just affirming like what you see in the first couple verses of Genesis is God and then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is a polemic against
helpful.
Gilgamesh, if you ask me.
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on there, but yeah.
Yeah. All right.
It was good, not whatever that.
Yeah, and that's okay. So what do you? I know you call it like a couple different things there. So what do you specifically call this? Your position on time? You said it was what was it called again? You said it earlier.
So because
there was a question in the comments that we want to get to about that leads with this, and I said we'd ask her. She said, replying to Matea said, what did she say? She said,
"Oh, is there a precedent for this view?"
Yes. Is there a precedent for this view? And I think that would segue into what you're going to ask next. I'm sorry. Listen, I have a personality disorder, so I interrupt. I'm an only child, so I don't know what I'm doing.
That's all right. That's fair. So, So is there precedent for it? Yes, there's a lot. So one of the things you'll see me do in the Time Maker book, which, like I said earlier, is now you can freely download it from the Rutledge website. So you can just go download it for free right now and see everything. So I try to trace out the history of a lot of the different views here. When it comes to this absolute theory of time, this is very ancient in both the West and the East. So I look at some of the history, like kind of around like Aristotle's time, because he rejects this view, but there are people who affirm it. And I trace out some of the history from there. In Eastern religions, I look at some of these ancient texts where they affirm this absolute theory, and then others go, that's terrible, get rid of it. So there's a long history of my view. And part of what's important for theology is it's terrible. But yeah, so part of what's going on in theology after World War II is people are obsessed with just kind of making theology just a history exercise. And that conditions us to say the following: if it looks new, it's probably false. I don't know if that's a good slogan to hold to, but people hold it. So what I do in a lot of my work is go, it's not new. Here's a long history for it. Now can we get back to the arguments to see if it's true or false? And so that's what I do in the Time Maker book is go, there's a long history here.
Yeah. Okay. So there. Yeah. So you still have. You're like, okay, even though I agree with you that it's, about if it's new, then it can't. Well, not necessarily. But I like how you still did that anyways. That you're like, but in case we can't get past this, here's the history.
Here's a really long, detailed history, the most detailed history on the topic that I know of. Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah. I find it interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it.
No new theologians allowed. Yeah, it's a closed club. No new perspectives allowed within the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, all right. Now it's funny that you're kind of saying that, because how I always heard about it is I never even thought about it. It never even came to mind, because I've always heard it. God, it's like a book, and God is outside of the time, and he and enters and does all that. And that's all I've heard for. I didn't even know that there was and I thought, the bad guys, like those silly atheists that try to throw B theory or something else on there. That's, they're all the devil anyways. So right. anything besides that kind of view of God is like a book, like the C.S. Lewis that you were bringing up on there. I thought it was a consistent view throughout until I started hearing your position. And so.
Yeah. So you're right. So it's the divine temporality is really old, and then so it's not new, and what's funny is this idea that all of time is just there for God to see, like a book. That's actually really new. That's something you see kind of some people toying around with quite seriously just before Einstein, and then after Einstein, like a lot of people take that view very literally and very seriously. So I've been talking with Emily Thomas. She's a professor of philosophy at Durham, and she works a lot on the history of philosophy, and in particular, history of philosophy of time. And in her view is that presentism, that the present is the only moment of time that exists, just went unquestioned in the West until you get closer to like the 20th century. She doesn't think there's that really like any really like legitimate disputes on that topic. So I'm constantly being confronted by a lot of theologians going, this is what everyone's always affirmed. And I'm like, you just snuck in a 20th century idea of time that no one would have affirmed in the past. Tell me who's doing the newfangled revisionism here. Like
fangled. Yeah.
Well, and that's why it does seem like this is like, at least, like I said, I haven't read I'm looking forward to reading the book and stuff like that, but just hearing and maybe seeing very little like talks of that you have done on it. It was, I mean, I don't know if I'm real like to defend it. I only, a couple times just on, like what Constantine said on TikTok, where the greatest minds hang out. And just, throwing out just some of the stuff and just talking it through. And I'm like, well, this seems easier to explain and easier to follow. And I don't, when we say like, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, when we say, okay, God is, God is love, God is, truth. Why can't we say, time is an attribute of that God has, and that, him upholding everything and everything dependent on him. Well, if everything's dependent on him, then, like you said, and then is all dependent, that, and then is dependent on God. It seems, I don't know why your book is, right. I feel like your book could have been like this.
Well, because I got, so one of my first postdoc that I did at Notre Dame, we had to make videos about our research, and they had to be 1 to 3 minutes long. That was the task they gave us. And so I thought for a really long time to figure out like how to get this down. And I was able to get it. I think the video is like 1 minute and 38 seconds long, and they put me in the studio, professional like cameras and everything, and I'm just saying God does one thing and then another. I put it more elegantly, but like that's really what it comes down to. And I remember a lot of family members watching that video going, "Oh, that's what Ryan's doing. Well, that's so easy to follow. I wasn't expecting that."
They thought you were going to come out in like a hoodie in it with a dagger.
Right. Yeah. Here's the ancient wisdom from, and something like really like convoluted. But it takes a long time to figure out and really wrestle with theological and philosophical ideas where you can get to the point you can explain it in a way that like a teenager can understand. I was a youth minister in undergrad in university.
Oh, and you have unrepentant sin?
I've got unrepentant sins from being a youth minister. I didn't have any facial hair, so
that's why God put you in that position, because it's a punishment.
It's a punishment from past.
I can reconcile.
Yeah,
that's what purgatory
came up with this. Yeah, the youth pastor is the brand of the unrepentant sinner, or else why would God have called him to such a position?
Yeah, and so part of the punishment was God telling me, look, if you cannot explain these ideas to your high school students, then you don't understand it well enough. So get back at the research until you can figure out how to do it. So that's kind of my rule of thumb for how I try to do theology, is if I can explain it in all the technical jargon, I can do that.
No, that's great.
But if I can explain it to like a 16-year-old, then I think I've really understood it.
And I do a lot of like street preaching and stuff like that. So I'll go out there and I just talk to, regular people that are, that they're just not even thinking, oh, I'm going to run into somebody who's going to be like, have you ever thought about time? Like,
Right.
And so, and that's why I appreciate like the view that you're holding and, like breaking it down to as simple, because that's what I always think about is how can I make this as simple as possible? Because I want anybody and everybody that I run into to be able to understand it. And I think your view that you have here, at least, and like I said, I haven't even done much of it, but to the very little that I know, it seems kind of easy to understand so far on there. And and it kind of sounds like that's what you were going for, is to make it as simple as possible to understand. And you just staying in here and then, I mean, that was pretty easy to understand. But have you ever have you done any debates yet on the topic or anything like that?
Yeah, I've done quite a few over the years. Recently, I did a debate on the coherence of theism, and the time stuff came up a bit. But my debate partner and I are both working on why would God create anything at all. So the questions kind of got more in this area of like divine rationality and God's reasons. But I've done debates in the past on time with a bunch of different people. The most recent one I did, I think, was with Ramon Harvey, who's an Islamic philosopher, and he wanted to defend divine timelessness. And so I went with divine temporality, of course. I think it's the most recent debate I've done on this specific topic. But
okay, and is that up on YouTube or something for anybody to watch, to check out?
So if people just look me up, just Google my name on YouTube, just God in Time, you'll probably find I've got a playlist of all the interviews I've done. So there's well over 100 different interviews and dialogues and debates and stuff I've done on these topics.
Nice. All right, good deal. Yeah, and how many books have you done on time yet? Is it just the one that you have coming out, or?
So I've got two. So first was The End of the Timeless God, which is with Oxford University Press in 2016. The second one is From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, and that was with Routledge in 2025. And so that's the one that just became free to download. But then I also wrote this little book about a big God, and some of the time stuff comes up there. Okay. And that's with Cascade, and that's a book that's actually I think it's like $25. So you can it's actually affordable. That was the whole point of that book.
All right. Well, and
good stocking stuffer.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, exactly. where do you recommend if somebody's wanting to, for the people listening, that they're like, I want to get more into this, where should they, out of your books, where should they start if they want to, what's a good place to start?
I would recommend starting with the little book about a big God, because it's geared more towards kind of introduction to philosophical theology. And then from there, you could jump into either The End of the Timeless God or The Divine Time Maker. Maybe The Divine Time Maker, because it's free to download, instead of trying to pay $100 for.
Thanks to the Finnish.
Yes, exactly, the Finnish way. So God bless Finland. So I'd recommend something like that, probably. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, so listen, everyone's gonna get mad at me if I don't ask you this, but I got several, and I don't even want to ask you this. It's so stupid, but got a bunch of messages on TikTok that were like, "Yo, ask Dr. Mullins, is it true he hates the tag argument?" I'm like, look, I'll just ask him if I have time. So look, just clarify your position on that, because so many people, out of all the things you've written, out of all the things you've done, they're like, so does he hate tag or what? And I'm like, all right, cool.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
So there you go.
Every time I do a live stream on TikTok, I get asked this, and my position is always the same, which is I don't understand the tag argument. So I don't, and I've not studied it in any meaningful way. So my view is I don't know. And then some people will be like, well, let me state it really quickly, and they'll state
and I think that's because
no, let's move on to demons.
Right.
Let's move on to demons.
What about demons? Yeah.
What about demons?
And I think the reason why that is because somebody who is really big on running the transcendental argument, Darth Dawkins on TikTok, he speaks very well of you, and that he was actually the first person when I heard, in passing, I heard him talking about that. Somebody brought up.
Dawkins speaks well of somebody? You're kidding.
He might not speak well of me or anybody else, but he speaks well of Dr. Mullen. But here's the. But here's the thing is, so in passing, and I heard him say, I heard him bring it up, and he started, he said he's read your work, and he started, and he started talking about it, and that's what I heard that, and then I was like, and I made a note, and I was like, look this up later, because that's pretty interesting, because I never thought of, and he said the same thing, time, he goes, well, instead of God being outside of time, he goes, I think of time being a part of, an attribute of God, and he goes, and I got this from reading Dr. And when I heard that, I was like, and I made a note of that to look at that. And that's what kind of, and I think that's why it keeps coming up is because a lot of people that do run the transcendental argument, are, I guess, familiar with your work on time. And that's why I think people associate it well, around that. And the atheists, of course, they hate the transcendental argument. So anything that comes up near that, they hate that too. So you just kind of got thrown into there from my understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Because Darth had messaged me ages ago on TikTok because like he had some question about time, and he's like, "I heard you're the guy to ask," and I was like, "Yeah, here's the book," because the book hadn't come out yet, the Time Maker book hadn't come out yet, but I had the copy editing proofs, and so I was like, "I'll just send you those, and then you can ask more specific questions from there." And he really liked it, and so he brought me on to do a live stream where he just asked me questions about it, and so I knew he was a big fan of it, but. The tag stuff, I looked at it very briefly in an apologetics class I took in seminary, and even my professor like gave it, I think maybe 20 minutes. He wasn't a big fan of it, so it's something I've just not really studied, so I just don't don't know what to say about it.
Well, yeah, because you're too busy writing on time.
I'm doing other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't have time for
but
so check this out.
Yes.
Matea Benz has a question, or actually Julie has a question.
Matea.
I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Are there any other current day theologians contemporaneously who agree with your view?
There's a lot of people. For a lot of people, it sounds so new to them, so they're still trying to figure out what to do with it. Richard Swinburne and Dean Zimmerman. Well, kind of, yeah. So Richard Swinburne's view is in the neighborhood of my view. Dean Zimmerman also was in the neighborhood of my view, and then when he read a paper I wrote on the topic, he's like, "Yeah, this just seems right to me." Timothy O'Connor has a really interesting paper on divine unity, and he mentions, just in passing, if we're going to develop this idea of divine unity, we really need to ask the question about God and time, and we need to develop a notion where time is like a mode of God's existence. But he doesn't develop it, though. He just says it, and I'm like, hey, well, I just happen to have a book that's coming out next year on this. So I was like, perfect. So there are a lot of people. I can name more people as well, but there's a lot of people that are close to what I did, and then when they've read my work or they've heard it, they kind of go, yeah, that seems better. That seems right. Okay. So they just kind of go with it. But this book just came out this year. And some of the papers that went into it, they only came out a few years ago. So it takes time for people to really figure out what's going on and decide whether they want to get on board with it or not.
Right. And that's why I think, and that's why I'm looking forward, and that's why I was curious about the debates you have done, because now I want to listen to it. And you said you did some against some Muslims that hold to it, but have you done debates against other Christians that are just like, no, this is too far out there? Or okay, so
it's most of those debates have been on like just the broader theme of like classical theism, and so the stuff on time comes up. I did do a dialogue with William Lane Craig on the majesty of reason a few years ago. I saw that. Yeah, that was an interesting one. And so Craig and I, our disagreement is so small, but when you're watching the video, it looks like we've got this huge disagreement, but all it really comes down to is like, what exactly is time? And then before creation, was God timeless or temporal? So it's like, it's so minute and nerdy. I didn't anticipate that a lot of people would just lose their minds over it and get so excited about that one, because it's such a technical debate.
Well, and that's why it kind of sounds like, and that's what I was like expecting, like, I'm like, because I hear so much people push back, and just like even me just bringing up like, oh yeah, I think I might hold on to this view, and everybody was like, getting ready to, they're like, where are the rocks? It doesn't sound like there's too big of it. That's why I was just interested to hear. Okay, I wanted to hear that because I enjoy watching the debates, and I'm like, okay, well, I want to hear what people are pushing back on. What's the problem, or is it just because it's this, something that we're not used to, because there's a lot of topics that like even when you get into like stuff on, like for me as a theonomist and God's law and dealing with that, and people get nervous of hearing, like, you know, when you start bringing up, oh yeah, the laws in the Old Testament, you know, people get nervous of that, and that's because of, you know, we've had a long history of culture being pointed a certain way.
Yeah.
So do you really feel like that's mainly the biggest, like, I guess, contention that you run into, is that it's just so normalized one way than actually people making arguments? Because I was going to bring up some stuff of the Bible, but you kind of already just addressed that right in the beginning by just saying, oh yeah, it's just saying and then and then and then. You talked about Abraham.
Yeah. I don't appreciate that, because that stomped out half of my script, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting. I was like, had all this stuff, and I'm like, all I have.
I'm like, okay, we're going.
I was like, I think I can still ask the Genesis question now, but you really did right in the beginning. You kind of just explained it all real quick, and I was like, well, I was messaging Constantine. I said, looks like we're done early. Your book should have been this big.
What are we gonna do now, bro?
I'm like, so what do you think about demons?
Run away!
Yeah.
Yeah. This, so
okay, I got one for you.
You got one. Let's go to this. Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, here's a tough one. This is a little sketchy, but what are your thoughts on hell, Dr. Mullins?
I've recently changed my mind on this. So I've gone back and forth a lot in my head of which view of hell is the right one to go with. Universalism, eternal conscious torment, some kind of annihilationism,
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, like, is there something like, you know, like this, like, or is there like a way where like you go to hell for a bit, but you've got the opportunity to get out?
Is it a bad marriage?
Yeah,
what are we doing?
Do we need a great divorce for this? I don't know. So I've published a couple papers over the last few years on this, where I've got this argument that looks at love, this particular definition of love, and I use this as a criteria to go, okay, here's the different views on hell. Do they violate any of these ideas about love? And then do they violate like the idea of like a final, like ultimate justice? And so God loves something if he values its existence, if he values its flourishing, and he values some kind of unity with it. And the unity's cashed out in terms of like what that it is. So like the way you're unified with your friends is different than the way you're unified with your wife, which is different from the way you're unified with your children. But there's some kind of loving unity there. And so I'm like, okay. And then there has to be a final justice, because Revelation says, you know, one day there'll be no more tears, no more evil. And she's like, okay, so that's gotta go. So I'm like, all right, what about annihilation? Well, annihilation, you get the final like judgment, like, you know, like evil's gone because it's been annihilated. But God definitely doesn't love the annihilated people, because like you can't be into someone if you don't value their existence. And if you eradicate them from existence, then you clearly don't value any sort of their flourishing or their or unity with them. And so I'm like, wow, okay, that violates all the conditions of love. That's bad. And I just kind of run through all the lists like this, and it looks like universalism would be the only way to go. But after living in Philadelphia it took Philadelphia forever to get over the pandemic. There's a particular reality that I've been really, really forced to confront with, which is the willed ignorance of humanity. Like, some people just want to remain ignorant no matter what. And I could easily imagine people rejecting God forever, even if they're given like ample opportunity over and over again. I'm just like, I see it when I walk around the street. I could just see it. So what this kind of forced me to do was reevaluate and go, what does my argument actually show? It shows that certain views on hell are inconsistent with love, but is love the only consideration when God's making his decisions? I don't think so. Because what if someone becomes unloving? What if someone becomes unlovable? Justice has to be a consideration. And sometimes when in our day-to-day lives, we do this too. Love is a factor, but also justice, but also mercy, but also there's a lot of things that go into our reasoning. And the same thing would be true of God. So I was putting too much emphasis, I think, on love in these earlier arguments, mainly because I was asked to respond to a book on divine love. So all of my focus was just on love because that was the assignment I was given. So I think my arguments don't really have as much force as I thought they did. So my answer now, what do I think about hell right now? I have no clue. I think there has to be hell. There has to be people who deserve it. But can I get out? I don't know.
Well said. And then I want to go back since Constantine stole my question on there. And I go back to the time thing because I was all excited, like Dr. Mullins. I was like, he's like, yeah. He's like, what should the topic be? I'm like, time. I was like, what are you doing? We're gonna talk about time. Although that
what else are we gonna?
Yeah, I was like, who cares what else he believes? I don't care what he. I don't care what he thinks about tech. I don't care what he thinks. Yeah, I'm like, and so, what do you think have been like? And I was kind of asking, do you like has people made like really the big pushback has seemed like just because people have been so normalized into being one view, but has there been any pushback or any kind of like biblical arguments or stuff that made you go, man, I really have to sit there and consider these things, or has this been a really easy topic for you to just go through?
The time. So okay, when I started my PhD, here was the theological landscape. All the biblical scholars were saying, yeah, timelessness is not a biblical notion. And then I even had all these direct quotes from a lot of classical theists, saying the same thing, going like, yeah, this isn't a biblical notion, but we know on the basis of philosophy that has to be that way. Louis Berkhoff, since we're going to stick with Calvin as in this episode, this is his view. He's like, yeah, you don't get timelessness in the Bible. It's not there. But on the basis of philosophy, we know timelessness is true. So this is what Louis Berkhoff says. And so I went into my PhD going, okay, we know this is just not a biblical statement. So let's look at the philosophy and look at the history and figure out, like, kind of clean up these ideas and just try to give a purely philosophical argument. That was the idea, because I already knew it wasn't true on the basis of scripture. And I thought that's not going to be controversial. I didn't realize we were going to go hyper-traditionalist like in the 21st century and say we care about the Bible but not really. I didn't know that was going to be the attitude in theology. I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah,
I don't know if the biggest pushback on your position is your view of time. Honestly, from my contemporaries, all the guff that Dr. Mullins gets is on the divine simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't really broached on that subject yet. Can't you proceed?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So there's a debate book. It's finally done. It's been like 5 years in the making, over 5 years in the making. It's called Contemplating Divine Simplicity, 5 Views. And so it's edited by Ross Enman. And I think it's supposed to come out in April. So it's me versus, let's see here, Catherine Rogers, who's presenting Anselm's view. Matthews Grant, who's presenting Thomism. David Bradshaw is presenting Gregory Palamas's view. And then Josh Blander, who's presenting John Duns Scotus's view. So I'm the one going, this is all false. Like, come on, guys. Like, come on. And so I bring up Trinity arguments, biblical arguments about divine free will, and the responses. Josh Blander makes a really good effort to respond to the arguments, and that's it.
A good effort.
He makes a really good effort. Everybody else, I was kind of like,
right.
Okay, and like actually the Thomist just goes, you can discern an answer to Ryan's objections from my essay, and I'm like, could I? I don't think I can. I don't think anybody can. All right, and then some other problems. He's like, well, I'd have to address those another day, and I'm like, but that's what we're here to do, is to address these right now. So I've got some scathing things to say at the very end of my final response in that book, of just going, no one's really responded to these objections, and the lack of response is just a demonstration that we as Christians should just be done with this doctrine and move on.
Yeah. As far as what we hold to be composite or not composite, or relationally or identically relational, this seems to be the crux of the argument, because what one responsibility would have to do as a conduit to the other. And so as far as our Eastern friends would parse this out and simply say that there's a relation somehow, some way, into essence versus energy, and then substances thrown in there. But of course, all of us in the Western camp, which we got drug across the coals with your friend Dr. Tuggy on this. called me by my first name, and I knew I was in trouble. When he literally said, "Okay, Michael," and I was like, "Oh gosh." But what we mean to speak of this is that we are dividing by relation and then making specific claims to the identity versus the relationality, if that's even a word, and how they operate with each other within an essence, which we would simply just call, from my perspective, the mind of God, instantiated as the Son, as the perfect knowledge, and the actualizer, in whom is the Spirit, thus being co-equal and co-eternal and distinct in personhood relationally. Now, these attributes that we start to pull apart, now they no longer become organic to what we're speaking of if we keep them at a separate distinction. And now we have to find out what type of distinction someone's using and what mode that they're using it in and how it operates within the properties that they're using. And I've got to adapt all kinds of weird semantics. And the next thing you know, I'm getting muted. Things just get silly when I'm speaking with someone from either not from the continental view, but from the analytic view. It's like we're speaking two different languages. And I just don't know and the next section of this conversation is just going to be defining what you mean by this. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And this has been a complaint going back to prior to the Middle Ages, like late antiquity even, of people who are against divine simplicity saying, why should I think that everything under the sun counts as a part? Like you guys have this overly permissible view of what counts as a part. Like, tell me what a part is. And when you get to like Middle Ages, like before Aquinas is born, Al-Ghazali is looking at this, and Al-Ghazali goes, you guys haven't answered this question, and everything you're saying is just absurd. And he just keeps saying this over and over, just going, that's absurd, that's absurd. Sometimes he gives a good explanation for why the view is absurd. Sometimes he just asserts it, which is funny in itself. But it's a question that needs to be answered. It was like, what counts as a part? And it's something I bring up in the debate book that's going to come out in April, of going, you guys need to tell me what counts as a part and why I should count all these things as a part. Because the unstated assumption is this: any distinction that I can make counts as a part. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. And
that's a wild statement.
It's a wild statement. And so here's what follows. Any distinction I can make counts as a part. Well, I can make a distinction between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Therefore, they're parts. And none of my dialogue partners want to admit that. And so they'll just say, well, the Trinity is a special case. But if God's attributes are distinct, well, then they're parts. And I'm like, Moses Maimonides in the Middle Ages, he addressed this question. And he said, you Christians, you're engaged in special pleading. You're saying you agree with us that every distinction counts as a part. But when it comes to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all of a sudden that goes out the window. What are you guys doing?
I try to specially plead at least twice a day, me personally.
Yeah.
Like if I don't have 2 special pleas a day, I'm probably not doing something right. In fact, I'll do vicious circles at least once.
I mean, I feel like
within the plea.
Yeah, go big or go home,
Yeah, if you're looking for fallacious arguments, look no further, mister. You found him. Listen, if there's I think there's a couple questions we can take from the audience at this point.
Sure.
We've kept you for over an hour. I don't know if that was the agreement or not.
I don't remember what we agreed on, but I can do a few more questions if from the audience if you want.
Sure, absolutely. Interesting comment from Relentless Roman. Kirk Cameron believes in annihilation now. Cry face. Okay, good addition. Love that. Yeah. Another one from Matea. I'm pronouncing her name wrong. Are there any other aspects of time you plan to study in the future? Have you not covered all your bases yet, Dr. Mullins?
I've done a lot.
Are you not done with time? Is it time enough?
I'm done with it for the moment, but there's a lot of other stuff to still be done. A lot of what I've done is usually related to God and creation and providence, but I've also done a lot of work on personal identity over time. What makes me the same person from one moment to the next? and then what are the implications of that for salvation, life after death, and so on. And so in the Divine Time Maker, the second half of the book is just looking at all these other theories on the nature of time. So like the growing block, eternalism, the moving spotlight, hypertime, all this kind of stuff, and go, what is this? How does this affect personal identity over time? How does this affect providence? How does this affect life after death? How does this affect the problem of evil? And try to draw out all the implications of that. There's still a lot of work to be done because hardly anybody does this. But the only other person who's really done this in the depth that I'm trying to is Emily Koreshi Hurst, where she's just looks at this stuff and goes, nobody's talking about, like, she wants to affirm like a block universe because she thinks that's what physics tells her. And she's like, well, you can't have any meaningful account of like objective salvation. So you got to come up with something else. Maybe we have to go with like Schleiermacher and some kind of subjective salvation. And I'm like, I don't want that, but I'm not German, so that's why I don't want it.
Yeah, I try to avoid European soteriology myself. But the next question from our good friend OG Kylo, I was hoping to get some more of my heathen atheist friends in here, and so I got one of them. It says, can I ask Dr. Mullins, what are his thoughts on growing block theory?
So Sven Rosenkranz and Fabrice Correa, they wrote a book called, what is it? Nothing Yet to Come, I think is what it's called, somewhere on my bookshelf behind me. And it's their defense of growing block. And their defense is really minimal. Their defense is, it's not as bad as you think. Like, it's not great, but like, it's not as bad as you think. And I thought that was the best defense of growing block I've ever seen. But it's still like, there's a lot of really serious problems. So here's one of the problems you get. You never know if you exist right now. I feel like I know that I exist right now, but if the growing block is true, I would never know that. Like, I might be in the past, and like that's kind of weird. Whereas I only ever find myself existing right now. That's just one of many problems. Other problems you get are related to identity over time. And so I'm stuck at this moment. A different Ryan that's kind of interestingly connected to me. He's stuck at a different moment, and so on and so on. So I don't get to go to heaven. I'm just stuck at this moment talking to you guys. Like later Ryans, they get to go to heaven. They're in heaven, but like I'm just stuck with you, which isn't too bad. But
I was like, is this purgatory?
Maybe,
like, I'm stuck with you. I'm stuck with you two clowns.
Yeah.
All right. And so, did you have to? Did you study a bunch of different theories on time when you were doing your work? Okay, so you did look into like all the other stuff, like okay.
Yeah.
Or was it only just in relation? I was wondering if it was only in relation to like God and time, or did you look up like what other people presented in time, like view theory and other stuff?
Yeah, a very exhaustive study on these things, and then I was a part of some different societies for philosophy of time around Europe, and so just really presenting a lot of this material everywhere. And my view is that this debate between what's called the A theory and the B theory, I think it's a really silly debate because no one can agree on what A theory and B theory mean. And I complain about this in my book, Into the Timeless God, just going like, this is a bit crazy. We don't know we can't agree. So like, let's move on. And I'd forgotten how much I complained about it. And then when I was in Spain last year, Natalia Deng, she got up to present and she's like, we have to move beyond the A, B, and C theory and just start doing philosophy of time in a very different way. And then she quotes me like griping about these things. And she's like, and Mullins, Ryan's right here. He agrees with us. Here's, these quotes from him. And like, so we just got to move on. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did complain about that. Okay, good. Yeah, we should move on. Like, this is nice. So other people are recognizing, we have to do things a bit differently.
Right. Because a couple of people very little that I talked to about certain stuff on there, you're right. It's kind of hard for everybody to get, because I have to constantly ask people, okay, well, what do you believe on this? What is it? What do you mean by when you say all this stuff? And that's why dealing with, time in a different, and that's why and maybe that's why I like the conversation. I like to hear your view on it. That I was drawn to it was because it was, it was different than what I was always hearing. Just like I said, where we heard the, book, God is outside of that. Mm-hmm. And this view that you have makes a lot more sense to me on there, and so that's why I'm probably gonna get your books and spend the time going through them. on there, because it was very intriguing for me to hear on that one, and so I thought that. So this was helpful.
With these academics, they're always talking about books. You know, what are you gonna do?
Right. Well, and that's what I was wondering. Is like, okay, in order to really understand your position, do people have to really get an idea of all these other views of time, or is it not even like kind of what you're bringing up, that we need to move past this? So it's like, do we have to, if somebody's defending like your position that you hold to that you explain on time, do they really have to really know all these other views on there, or is this like what you said? Do we just need to move past it and say, well, here's I don't know if you understand on that. Did we just?
I do understand the question. So one of the things I do in the Divine Time Maker book is I try to clarify exactly what all the different questions there are to ask, because the discussions within the philosophy of time had gotten very convoluted. People got very frustrated, and then we're able to go, hang on, I think here's where we're making all these mistakes. And so we got to this new stage where we could bring a lot more clarity to the conversation. So the A theory versus B theory stuff, that was, in my view, A theory versus B theory is, how do we talk about talking about time? And you're like, how do we talk about talking about time? Can't I just talk about time? And they're like, no. How do we talk about? I'm like, oh gosh, all right. And that's where it kind of got lost. So the question we had a minute ago about the growing block theory, there was this debate of people going, well, the growing block is an A theory. No, it's a B theory. No, and I'm like, okay, well, why don't we just talk about the growing block itself? Like, what's going on there? And just set the A and B's and C's aside. And that's what a lot of people are starting to do now within the last 10 years or so, because they've kind of realized some of these debates, we thought we knew what we were talking about. It turns out we didn't. We were getting confused, but we've been able to clarify the better questions to ask. At least I hope we have. So you don't need to know a lot about A theory versus B theory to read my stuff. I very rarely use those phrases in the most recent book because I don't need it. What people are really interested in is things like presentism, growing block, eternalism, absolute versus relational theory. These are the kind of things they're interested in. That's what the debates are supposed to be about.
Good deal. Yeah, that makes to me that makes it easier to understand. So looking forward to that. Constantine, you have a good question up here that's kind of related to it. What is a good apologetic? Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
No, you could. I think we're okay with you reading it. I can read it backwards. I have this weird skill that I can read things backwards.
Hey, technically English wasn't my first language, so if I see that things wrong, so what is a good apologetic when atheists claim that God is bound by time due to him changing from one place to another during creation?
Mm-hmm. I just don't think there is a problem here, because when you say he's bound, you're like, oh, that sounds bad. But you go, what does that mean? Like, if you've got my view, you're like, time's an attribute of God. And you're like, God's bound by his essential attributes. He's completely bound and limited to be all powerful. He's completely bound and limited, all knowing. He's completely bound.
He'll never be able to create that rock that he can't lift. What is he going to do?
Right. And so it's just kind of like, okay, what's the problem here? There is no problem. God does one thing and another. Well, that's just called reality. That's how causation works. Like, tell me more.
And that's what kind of just in about whatever the hour of just learning your position on that, I was already thinking of that. Is I think sometimes I always tell people when they go, well, it seems like you're putting God in a box, and I'm like, no, I'm keeping God in the box that he set himself in. When God says that, it's impossible for him to lie, that's a box. When he says that, when he says that he is, I am the way, I am the truth, he's all truth revealing. So there's certain box, so, and that's why with the position on time now, like what you said, I like how, you're like, so what? Does this change anything? Yes. And I think that's the what you were talking about right in the get-go of it, is it doesn't change anything. And you're like, I could explain my position in the Bible easily. And then Abraham, and then talked onto there. And that was because that was literally the question that I had on there to start out was, can you explain your position from using scripture? And then you were like, and
right.
Seemed pretty simple to me on there.
It's very straightforward. So I want to say something about this putting God in a box. That was a phrase I heard a lot as a teenager when I was asking questions at church. We don't want to put God in a box. And I eventually realized, I'm like, what's the big deal? Like, we categorize everything. If I say God's timeless, I put him in a box, a conceptual box of some sort. If I say God's temporal, I put him in another conceptual box. The question is, are we really getting our concepts that carve reality at its joints? Are we getting the correct categories? It only becomes a problem if when you talk about like there being these limits to reality, or like there's this fence or this box you're putting God in, you're assuming there's something outside of it. And so that's why God's limited. But when we're talking about like logic, or my view, like what I think, like time is just an essential attribute of God. If that's right, there's nothing outside of this box. Like that just is what the limits of reality are. End of story. So can God like do logically impossible things? No. There's no logical contradictions. That's just how reality works. So there's not like there's this other side of the box where it's like, oh, if only God could get out there, but he can't. No. So I think our language of boxes and boundaries and stuff, sometimes it does a lot more work than it really should.
Right. It's like we're trying to go beyond what God, like, we're trying to think of something beyond God. Right. Sense in there.
Yeah. That's you're asking for the impossible. It's like, just don't ask for the impossible.
Dr. Mullins, one of our engagement partners from the atheist camp, a pretty tough customer, pensive, pretty bright philosopher. Says, what does Dr. Ryan think about these sort of Bayesian arguments? I'm assuming Bayesian epistemology that reduce the force of theist arguments by destroying the prior likelihood of theism, and does it work?
I've not seen a version of the argument that I find very persuasive. What you have to do to try to lower the prior probability of theism is usually do one of two things. Try to show there's some sort of inconsistency or incoherence in the idea of God. If you do that, well, then you don't even need to do all the Bayesian stuff. Because if you really show a contradiction in the idea of God, well, then the probability that God exists is zero. Like, it's just, it's just incoherent. It's not possibly true. So all the Bayes stuff, that just goes out the window. If you're trying to show that the idea of God is like counterintuitive, that would be really remarkable to see, because all the work in cognitive science is saying the exact opposite. Like when we're looking at developmental psychology, cognitive science, and these sort of things, human persons naturally develop beliefs about God and supernatural entities at incredibly young ages. So there's something very intuitive about the idea of God, that humans just naturally develop the beliefs about these things. So the prior probability seems quite high. So I guess your options are to try to go against all of that, or show that the idea of God is just incoherent in terms of the prior likelihood of theism. If you want to show like something else, like problem of evil or something, you're not really looking at the prior probability of theism, I guess.
Right. And then I would actually insist upon what language of contradiction are we going to utilize here?
Sure. You want to get clear on the kind of contradictions, your logical framework, all that jazz. But yeah, these are debates that people do have.
Yeah. Right. Well, hey, listen, we've taken up a lot of your time. I thought I was going to get a couple more atheists in here to bring up some questions, at least the more honest engagers, the more. Excuse me. It seems like when I deal with atheists, like the guys like that have asked the questions, those are the toughest ones to deal with, because they're a little bit more honest. And it's like they don't have this anger problem with God. They just have these, like, I have a problem with the intuition, the intuitive nature of it, the logistics in which it frames it out, the believability. I would have liked to have had more of those guys in here, but I think we got a whole lot out of you. I think we held you over.
He set it up right in the beginning. That's why we're not getting any questions from everybody else, because everybody who had questions to begin with, he destroyed in the beginning by just going.
Half my script is gone from the first narrative.
And then that's like literally, if we make a highlight clip, we're just gonna make a highlight clip and go, okay, here we go, and then he just goes, and then Abraham, and then you just see everybody just sit back after that. So it was because all the questions that I have, once you answer that, everybody on my end was just like, oh yeah, that's pretty simple.
Right. Yeah, it's something I do a lot, where I come in and just destroy really big ideas in 30 seconds or less. Yeah.
It's what I'm known for, yeah.
I
All
didn't get a job.
interviews are like 5 minutes.
5 minutes long. Yeah, I had an interview at Oxford, and it was a job interview, and somebody in the audience asked me a question about love, and I was like, I don't think that definition of love works, because God wouldn't love us, and then when I get to heaven, I couldn't love anyone. So yeah, I just think this is incoherent. I just moved on really quick. I didn't realize I just destroyed this guy's view on love in 30 seconds or less, and he didn't take kindly to it, and I didn't get the job. So
But yeah, somebody who spends hours on something and then you just say like 3 words and it's done.
Like,
that's
incoherent.
It's like, you couldn't have said that a day ago before I did all this work. Well, and here's the thing is, just so everybody knows, I'm starting a GoFundMe to go and get Dr. Mullins' book. I'm just kidding, because I wanted to look good on the shelf.
We haven't mentioned the monetary value behind some of these great works. But listen, we'll just do this. We've got one last question, and then we'll go ahead and conclude, if that's okay with you, Dr. Mullins. We've kept you probably beyond what you agreed to. And again, from our heathen friends, same interlocutor, Pensive. If you ever come across him, very valuable conversations. So his question is this: what about arguing against the background commitments of classical theism, such as, like content externalism, wouldn't arguing those reduce the likelihood as well?
Yes, this is a much better approach than like the previous question led on, because what you're doing here is you're not looking at just like God. You're looking at a specific model of God and looking at certain theological commitments that come with it. And there, I think you can do a lot of interesting work on showing incoherencies or implausibilities that could lower the likelihood. Because I've done a lot of work on this. So for example, with classical theism, I have a paper arguing that classical theism prevents God from having a reason to create the universe. So if you're committed to the idea that God is perfectly rational, so always acts on the basis of good reasons, well, the existence of the universe, that seems like that would give you reason to think God does not exist. And so you can when you start looking at much more thicker theological claims and views on God and reality, then I think you can get a lot of traction with some of these arguments.
Yeah, when you ask me that, all I'm going to say is that's like when you say asking God not to create, what you're telling me is you're asking God not to think. Everything is just a modality of thought.
Right.
So, I mean, if you say, what do you mean he didn't create? This is just, everything is in the mind of God. Well, you're asking him not to think. That doesn't.
Exactly. And so this is what some of the debates I've had published with some different idealists. This is the stuff we get into, because some of these different idealist positions, they entail that, well, God thinking, well, therefore everything else exists, because that's just what it is. For everything else to exist is God thinking.
Yeah.
And
therefore God cooked.
Yeah, exactly. Some people are like that. Others go, ooh, so I don't get free will. I'm like, no, you don't get, you get a modal collapse. They're like, I don't like that. I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. This is what your view gets. So that's how some of these go.
So just last thing from Pensive, by the way, great guy to talk to. He says, love the answers, Dr. Mullins. Would love to have this conversation at much deeper length with you, and thank you. And on that note, from our heathen friends in the atheist community, and on behalf of us within the right side of truth, as we like to say, we thank you for your time, and may the hand of the Lord be upon you, and may you walk in great love and purpose in his kingdom and not your own.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I have I'm going to be getting your books, and so I'm going to start learning on that, because that was very interesting. So look forward to taking the time and reading through it all. And then and after spending all that time reading it, just to look at somebody and go, yeah, it's and then Abraham.
Yeah, and there you go. You're done.
Good deal. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for
Dr. Mullins. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
It's been a real pleasure, Dr. Mullins. Thank you.
And then Constantine just cuts out. That's how it goes. He says goodbye, and his internet he tosses the whole router and everything after the interviews.
Just hold on to me, Elon Musk. Just travel with me a little further, Starlink.
He's like, goodbye. Boom.
All right, listen, Dr. Mullins. Yeah, cooked. All right, take it easy. God bless everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'd love to do this again sometime, Dr. Mullins. And if you ever feel like stepping into the slums of Tatooine and arguing the cross with us, TikTok is our space, but we can't protect you down there.
All right. God bless you guys. See ya.
Enjoy your day, Dr. Mullins.